All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see you here once again. I hope you've had a good week so far. It's been a warmer day today, so last I saw it was up about 77. I don't know if it's any higher than that, but definitely a lot more than we've had in the past. I want to welcome you again to our seminar, Mayan Prophecy versus Revelation Prophecy. And tonight I do have a question I want to answer, and we'll take a look at that. But I also have a change in the schedule. I've decided to share a different subject tonight. And so we're going to continue on, of course, with the series on Thursday or Friday night. But I got to thinking about what I have just shared with you and the emphasis that I've put on truth and the sources that we use and things of that nature. So I've got a story to tell you tonight. And so we'll get into that in a few minutes. But I do want to remind you that we'll pick up with our prophecy in Revelation on Friday night, the mighty angel of Revelation 10. And we're going to see a link between Revelation 9, verse 8 and 9, and then verse 10. We're going to see the sequencing in prophetic history flow right into chapter 10. And we're going to begin to identify what happened in 1844 and why I've had that date of 1798 up there on the timeline many times. And so we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to start nailing those down and show why scholars have felt that those dates are in line with the prophecies of Daniel. And so we'll look at that then. So let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then I'll share the question that I have tonight. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, Lord, we want to thank you for being with us tonight and through this week. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Lord, we want to know the truth because we know that your Bible says the truth will set us free. And so, Lord, guide our thoughts and guide our hearts tonight. Send your Spirit, Lord, to lead us into that truth, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, the particular question came up from our subject the last time, and it has to do with 1 Samuel chapter 13. So if you'll turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 13, we're going to look at verse 8. Now, you'll recall when we talked about the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel 13 and all, we were talking about the problems that Saul had. Remember, Saul was anointed with the Holy Spirit. The prophet Samuel had prophesied that certain specific things would happen to him, and they did. And then the Bible said he was changed into another man. And so he had the Spirit upon him, but we found that Saul kept making decisions that were going against the Word of God, against the word of the prophet. And somebody came up with a question about his waiting the 7 days. So in 1 Samuel 13, let's start with verse 7. Saul here and the children of Israel are being confronted by the Philistines, and his army is melting away. Verse 7. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was in Gilgal, and all the people followed him, trembling. Then he waited 7 days, the Bible says, according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So Saul said, "Bring a burnt offering, peace offerings here to me," and he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened, as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And so we know from the story the other night that Samuel, the prophet, was not happy with what Saul had done because he had not obeyed his word. He had not waited. Because in those days it was only to be a prophet. This was, of course, during the time when the priest could offer offerings too, but the prophet or the priest were the only ones that could offer offerings. And so Saul had gone against that word. The question is that it appears as though the Bible says in verse 8 that Saul did wait 7 days. And that, in fact, he was within the guidelines of a "thus saith the Lord." that the Lord had told him through the prophet Samuel that he should wait 7 days, and then he would come and they would offer the offering. Verse 8 says, "Then he waited 7 days, according to the time set by Samuel." Well, I want you to notice something here, and that is that immediately after he offers the offering, what happens? In verse 10, what does it say? As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, that Samuel came. So what time period was that in? That was probably on the 7th day still, because it was immediately after he just finished offering the offering. So if Saul had waited just a little bit longer, Samuel would have gotten there and performed the sacrifice. Now, what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with a test. There are many times that God tests his people, the children of Israel. There's a particular story in the Old Testament where God commands a prophet to go and tell a Israelite king that, and predict a prophecy against him. And the Lord gives him very specific directions. He says, you're to go and straight there and give the prophecy, give the testimony, and you're not to eat anything, you're not to go to the right hand, you're not to go to the left hand, you're not to eat with anyone, you're going to come straight back by another way. So that was a thus saith the Lord. Well, the prophet does that, but then as he's coming back, there is a false prophet that goes out to meet him, and the false prophet says, I have heard a word from the Lord, and he says, you're supposed to come back and eat with me. Well, unfortunately, this young prophet, the first one, decides to believe the older prophet, the false prophet, and he goes back with him, and he eats, and then there's pronounced a judgment upon him because he did not obey a thus saith the Lord. In that instance, the young prophet was tested because he was supposed to obey a thus saith the Lord and nothing else, not listen to somebody else. In this instance, Saul was given a very specific command that he was to wait 7 days, and then Samuel would come and give the prophet. Obviously, Saul was looking around at his dwindling forces, his dwindling army. They were running away, and so he felt like he had to do something. And you and I oftentimes go through a similar circumstance when we're waiting for something to happen and it doesn't happen as soon as we want to. Anybody anticipated the red light before? And you jump the gun? You go before it's really green? And so sometimes we do that ourselves. We get anxious, we get impatient. And sometimes there's some flashing lights behind us, that helps us to remember that we've not obeyed a thus saith the traffic light, right? Whatever it may be. In this instance, it was very much the same. King Saul had just gotten anxious, and evidently the 7th day of waiting was not over yet, because immediately right after he gives that offering, Samuel shows up. It's a test. God is testing him. Of course, we've noticed that God has been testing Saul through this whole story. He tested him to see if he would wait, if he would annihilate Amalekites and things like that, and he failed each time. So that's the answer to the question here, that in fact, God did come, or his prophet did come on the 7th day, but it was evidently later on in the day and after Samuel, or I should say Saul, had already done the sacrifice. All right? Okay, let's go ahead, and I'd like you to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8. And I'm going to tell you a story tonight, because we've been dealing with many times with this subject of how do you know who to trust. One of the primary things that happened in my life was that I wanted to walk my own road. And I got to the point where I felt like I couldn't trust the people, the teachers, whoever else it was around me. And so I decided to go my own direction. Now, I don't know if you can see the sign off the side there, but it says dead end street. And there are roads in our lives that end up being dead end, but we don't know about it. We don't know that until we get to the end of it. The biggest desire in my life was to find the truth. It would be nice if there was an exit that was that way, it would lead us to truth. Now there is a place, I think it's in New Mexico, called Truth and Consequences, but it's not exactly the place where you're going to find the truth. But it was something that I desperately wanted to know in my life. And so, because in this series we've been talking about the truth and wanting to know the truth about 2012, about some of the theories out there about what's going to happen on this planet, I thought I'd show you the end result of not following the truth. It's a rather bizarre story. It's not your common run-of-the-mill story of what can happen, but it is very germane to our subject here, because it shows very clearly how when you listen to the wrong voices, when you trust the wrong sources, it can lead not only to a dead end, but also facing death itself. Now in Luke chapter 8, we're going to start at verse 26. There's a story about Jesus coming upon a demon-possessed man. It says in verse 26, "Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, with a loud voice said, 'What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me.'" Now, what does the Bible say, first off, about the duration of this man's condition, this man's situation? It says in verse 27 that he had demons for a long time, right? There had been a long period of time that this man had been either possessed by demons or harassed by demons or something of that nature. Now, I've often asked the question, how did he get to this point? Because at one time in this man's life, he was someone's son, right? Growing up in probably a pretty normal Israeli family, probably grew up to know God, grew up to worship God, and to love his parents and love all those in his family and things of that nature. And yet here at the end of this story, at the beginning of this story, we see him in his latter state, after a long time, the Bible says. So I've often asked myself, how did he get to this point? And the subject has to do with something the Bible has mentioned to us a number of times. In Zechariah chapter 3, there's a little story there where it talks about how Satan appears before the Lord with Joshua the high priest. And Joshua the high priest is dressed in filthy rags, the Bible says. And Satan begins to accuse Joshua to the Lord. In other words, he says, this man is not worthy of his position as the high priest. He's a sinner. He really belongs to me because after all, I'm the author of sin, and so he's one of my subjects. And the Bible goes on to say that the angel of the Lord intervenes and says, "The Lord rebuke you, O Satan. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire?" Now what that is it's a small vignette of the great controversy story that we've been talking about. Remember when we talked about Job and how Satan came to confront God and God said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And we've seen that Satan claims to control everybody here down on this planet. And God says, "No, not everybody. Have you considered my servant Job?" In the story of Zechariah there, we have the same sort of thing. And God makes the decision at times to pluck people as brands out of the fire. He intercedes for them. In fact, Jesus, that's one of his major themes, is that he is our intercessor. He's the intercessor between heaven and earth for every man, woman, and child. And so he stands in the gap for us if we want him to. Now, what I didn't realize in my life, not having grown up a Christian, is that there's a certain grooming process that takes place in every person's life. Now, as parents, if we have certain dreams for our children, we begin to groom them early, don't we? If we want them to be doctors or lawyers or physicians or nurses or whatever it is, we try to buy toys or to tell them stories or have things in their life that would have a tendency to encourage them toward that end. And so in a way, some parents are more decided about it than others, but some of us begin to groom our children like that so they'll grow up to be successful in that field. What I didn't realize, and what I found that most people don't realize, is that there are two entities in this world that are seeking to groom us for one thing or another. The devil is seeking to groom us for his side of the controversy, and God wants desperately to groom us for his side. In other words, to help us to know the truth and be set free by the truth. And it's a process, or it's a thing that goes on oftentimes behind the scenes. I had no clue that this was going on in my life. And friends, as I look out in the world today, I find that most people don't have a clue that somebody is seeking to groom them for a certain position. For instance, you probably got pets, right? And you take your pet to be groomed. Take them into the vet or wherever it is and have them groomed. And when they come out, what do they look like? They look like exactly what you asked them to be groomed to look like, right? Supposedly, if everything goes well, right? And sometimes when we go in to have our hair cut, we want it to come out looking a certain way. It doesn't happen either. But nonetheless, when we do that, when we pay money to have our pets groomed, we pay for them to come out looking a certain way. That's what's taking place in our world today, behind the scenes, with every man, woman, and child. And most of us don't know it's happening. And it's one of the primary reasons why I do these seminars. Because I recognize that somebody was grooming me for something that I had no clue I was being groomed for. And so, as I had my eyes opened, I began to realize, most people don't realize this. What did we learn about sincerity the other night? That you can be the most sincere person in the world, right? But you can be sincerely wrong and heading down the wrong track. And those soldiers during the Battle of the Ardennes, when they started retreating from the Battle of the Bulge and all that, and they came to the road signs that they didn't know that the Germans had turned around, they went down the road they thought where they were supposed to go. Those were the most sincere soldiers on that battlefield right then, right? They were going down the road they thought they should go down. But unfortunately, their sincerity did not make sure that they were going in the right direction. So what I realized is that because the Bible tells us that there is a devil and there is a God, and that there's a controversy between them, that each of them are vying for our attention. Each of them are seeking to groom us for one thing or another. And we see this over and over again in the Bible, and we don't realize what's happening. This man in Luke 8 had been groomed for life by his parents, but not the life that he was eventually to fall into. So what we're going to see tonight is there are two powers that want to groom you for life. And you and I have to make a conscious decision which grooming it is. Otherwise, it falls to the default setting. By the way, do you know what the default setting is for a human? The default setting is to fall into Satan's camp. And that's something that I didn't realize. You see, the Bible says it throws out again and again, I keep sharing these with you, these confrontational statements. It says in the book of Jeremiah, I think it is, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Now that's the last thing I thought of my own heart before I became a Christian. I thought I had a good heart. I thought that I could figure out what was right and what was wrong. But according to the Bible, without God, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So the default setting for a human being is that wicked heart, is that sinful heart. And a sinful heart continually makes sinful decisions, by and large, and ends up following not God, but his adversary. And the reason why Jesus came and told Nicodemus that you must be born again is because he recognized as long as we remain in the default setting of a wicked heart, a deceitful heart, we will not be able to see the truth. And we will not give up the sinful life. And so Jesus came along and said, you must be born again. You must have a new heart. He says in Jeremiah 36:26, a new heart will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take the stony heart from out of you and give you a heart of flesh. So God promises, he knows the problem. He knows our default condition is a sinful heart, is a heart that is deceitful. And so he offers to change our heart. That's the beautiful thing about what God does for us and promises us here. I did not know that. And I lived in that vacuum, as it were, of not understanding a very fundamental principle of existence. And because I didn't understand it, I learned and I believed that what I believed and what I processed, what I analyzed, was right and would lead me in the right direction if I simply guided myself by certain principles that I held as good. So, undoubtedly, this gentleman, this man that's now in our story, demon-possessed, at one time was probably in a similar situation. He is an every man, an every woman. He could have been any one of us. Undoubtedly was raised in a good home. You think about the Ted Bundys of our world, the mass murderers, the people that end up on death row and doing horrendous things. They don't start out mass murderers. It's just like Satan. He didn't start out a devil. But along the way, choices were made that groomed them for a life that they did not realize they were headed for. Now, what we're going to see here today is that Jesus begins to groom this man for a public display of his power and his grace. Let's continue reading the story here. Verse 29. For he, Jesus, had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, what is your name? Legion. And he said, Legion, because many demons had entered him. So this man is in a deplorable condition here. He's evidently made one bad decision after another, and he's finally found himself in a place where he cannot save himself. He cannot help himself. So as we look at this man, we realize that, and I realize that this is the condition of every man, woman, and child without the interference of the God of heaven. Now, my story is interesting in the sense that I grew up in a very normal family. I grew up as a Boy Scout. That's me on your left, my sister and my brother. And it was a military family, as I told you before. My dad was a Marine. He was in World War II, he was in Korea, and he was in Vietnam 3 times. And so he was a warrior's warrior. That's what he wanted, and that's what he lived for. And I was a very disciplined life that I grew up in, but very, very moralistic. In other words, we didn't go to church, but maybe every once in a while we went to church on Sunday, on Easter, I should say. And so we've got pictures that I can look back at in my mom's album and things, that we went every once in a while. But as far as continually going and learning what Christianity was all about, I didn't know that. I had no clue what that worldview was all about. And got into Boy Scouts, went camping. You can kind of see me off to the side there. Pretty skinny kid, normal, very typical kid. Here's my dad and my older brother and sister and I, and this is in the Philippines. We lived in the Philippines for 2 years. And as I grew up, I was a rather sensitive kid, but I found that sometimes for sensitive kids, they don't often get treated very well. And so I had run-ins with people that kind of scarred me to a certain degree. I apologize that it's not very clear. It's the best I can do. We didn't have real good cameras back in those days. But something happened to me in the Philippines that set the stage for what was to happen in my life. I remember we had been there 2 years, and I developed some friends. Even though I was shy and timid, I developed some friends. And I remember I decided to go down to the local pool one last time before we left. We were due to leave to go back stateside about a week or two. I can't remember exactly what it was. And while I was down there in the pool, 2 of my friends came and joined me there and began to beat me up and to pummel me and to try to drown me in the pool. And I don't know where the lifeguard was, but it was a horrible experience. I remember being down so long that I just thought I was not going to survive. I was taking in water, and then they'd bring me back up and they'd hit me again, and it seems like it lasted forever. But finally they gave up, and it just devastated me. It lasted so long, and they were a lot bigger than I was, and like I said, I was pretty scrawny. I wasn't very big in those days, and it just totally traumatized me. In fact, to the point that I did not remember exactly what happened, in other words, the details of it, until I was in my 30s. I mean, I blacked it out. And I've learned from that time that it probably was like this post-traumatic stress syndrome that they talk about. Although I wasn't in a war, it was a war for me, and it so traumatized me that I couldn't remember the details of it for years and years and years. But I do remember that after it happened, when I got home and we finally got on the plane to come back to the States, I remember to this day sitting it was the middle seat of that plane, and I remember to this day vowing that I would never let that happen again. I would never let anybody so abuse me that I could not defend myself and that I would allow anything of that nature to take place. That one incident, above all others, set me off on a path that led me almost to my death. And so we got back home and ended up staying in Southern California, finished out my high school there, and I became a loner because I'd learned very clearly that I could not trust even those people that I called my friends. And so I withdrew myself from friendships of any kind. I had superficial friendships, people that were, lived in the rural area around us, but I would never let anybody come any closer than just that superficiality. And I kept doing that. I kept responding that way. And I look at this gentleman here that ended up being possessed by not just one demon, but a legion, it said. In verse 31 it says, and they begged him that he would not command them to go into the abyss. So there were so many demons in this man by this time in his life, that who knows exactly the decisions that he had been making that caused not just one demon to enter him, but hundreds and hundreds of them. And we realize as we look at this that Satan was obviously grooming this man for this kind of existence. He wanted him to cause the kind of harassment, the kind of confusion, the kind of chaos in the surrounding area that he did. People would know that he had power over this man. It's looking like these aren't coming out very good. This is a picture of me when I'm about 16 or 17. I was still in Boy Scouts, Still a loner, but we got into a lot of hiking in the troop that I was in. Did a lot of mountain climbing and hiking and things of that nature. And I enjoyed being out in nature because, of course, in nature, without people, I didn't have to worry about people that I couldn't trust. And so I spent more and more time out in nature. I got into rock climbing and climbed places like this, straight up stuff, and developed a knack for that. And I don't do it anymore. But, and my wife is glad for that. But that was my life. You know, I just, I would go to school, but in school I began to develop an interest in philosophies. The philosophies of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism, that sort of a thing, dabbling in atheism, agnosticism for sure, but beginning to dabble in atheism. Because you see, one of the things that, as I look back, I realized was happening is that when you isolate yourself and when you don't sense that you have anybody that you can trust, you begin to lose any sort of hope. And there's a sense that, well, if there's nobody that you can trust, then the love seems to go away, the sense of belonging goes away, and you become more and more isolated. And that, of course, is the essential core of existentialism. In other words, feeling like you're all alone. There is nobody else. There's no reason why you were created to be here on this planet. There is no reason why your existence is. You have to make your own reasons for your existence. And so I found a lot of comfort, as it were, in the isolated solitude of the mountains, and spent a lot of time climbing a place called Tockett's Rock down in Southern California. It's by a mountain called San Jacinto, and there's a lot of climbing that takes place down there. And more time I spent down in that particular area. Now, the process that I'm telling you about is one that doesn't necessarily happen to every person. But if you look back on your life, you can see certain things that have happened to you that have changed the direction that you've gone. For me, I began to realize that I couldn't trust other people, but I didn't necessarily come to the point where I felt like I couldn't trust the books that I was reading. As I was reading these philosophies and I was reading the scientific literature, I began to, take it in. And I was very much involved in evolution and scientific endeavor. I love science, I love mathematics. When I finally graduated from high school, when I was 17, I left home, and my parents, I told them that I wanted to go to Texas A&M because they had a nuclear engineering program there, and I wanted to become a nuclear physicist. And so I left home, traveled out to Texas A&M, and went through the preliminary process, took some exams to find out where they should place me in the classes. And toward the end of that week, I'd been battling with this decision all week long, and I finally decided, I really don't want to go to school here. And so I went in to see the dean, sat down with him, and told him my dilemma. And basically, I didn't tell him the decision I was wanting to make here. But as I look back in hindsight, basically it was a decision between being a nuclear physicist versus being a hippie. And it was a struggle to decide which was the better choice. And that's where my head was at. Because I was not trusting the people around me. I was not trusting society. I was imbibing all the stuff that was going on in the 60s and the 70s. And if you know anything about that time period, there was a lot of rebellion. There was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of alcohol, there was a lot of loose sex, there was a lot of all sorts of stuff that was teaching me to rebel and to not trust the establishment. And so I chose to drop out of school before I even actually got in there and become a hippie. And I began to hitchhike all over the place and just live out of my pack. I lived out of my pack for about 10 years. That's all the the possessions I had was in a backpack. And I lived that way, and there were times that my parents didn't know where I was at. I wasn't very good at calling. Of course, we didn't have cell phones back in those days. I wouldn't have had one if they had them. And I began to get more and more involved in spending as much time outdoors as I could. I put a few of those. This is what I began to look like with a beard. Again, not a real good one there. But it gets worse. And I just love to be in places like this. This is where I felt comfortable. This is where I felt that I belonged. Here's a picture of me just before I go up to Alaska. I spent a summer up in Alaska in the fishing industry. And I also got into a lot of the native Indian philosophies and religious look on things. My family is related. We have Indian ancestry behind us. And so I began to think about these things and to consolidate what was my own personal belief system. I had dabbled, like I said, in existentialism in school and all, but the further I went, the more I began to dabble in other things. And so I looked into the beliefs of the American Indians. And so I took in what they believed. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is that what I was doing is I was not believing everything that I read. Because remember, I can't trust people, right? And so what I would do is I would read books, and I would take out of those books the things that I believed were true. I would analyze them. I would decide this is true and this is not true. And so I would take that from that book, or that particular philosophy, or that particular author. And that's what I did with the American Indians. I got to the point where logic and reason became my God. Emotion was out of the picture, because emotions, of course, was all about what had happened in the past. And so I disciplined myself to not be emotional anymore. And I got into martial arts, of course, from the physical side to protect myself. And the mental side, I just disciplined myself to where I could overcome those kind of things if they might come my way. One of the best ways, of course, that I did that is I just stayed away from people. Because, of course, I didn't trust them. So I took in things from the American Indians, and I also got involved in Buddhism at that time. And so, again, I would read the literature of Buddhism, and I would take from Buddhism what I wanted. And I tried that path, and I found that every one of these isms, as I said before, led down to a dead end. They did not give what they promised. And I was very disciplined in doing this, and I put a lot of energy into it. And I don't believe that I could have done it any better than I did. And during that time period, I got into New Age stuff. That was very big for the counterculture at that time. We didn't necessarily call it New Age. It's called New Age today. But what it is occultism. Pyramids were big. You know, I began to read all those books out there. Chariots of the Gods, you know, and of course Edgar Casey and things of that nature. You know, and all the occult theories and the concepts out there, the Illuminati, you name it, you know, I dabbled in it. And I looked into these things, and I began to take, as I said, from all these different things, a sense of what I thought was right. I also dabbled in a lot of the Eastern religions, because, you know, of course, in the rock and roll scene, a lot of the artists were bringing the Eastern religions into mainstream America. And the Beatles, of course, did that, and a lot of the others, Donovan, you name it, all of those. And one of the things that they basically taught is that Jesus was just another Buddha. He was another highly developed entity, you know, spiritual person. And he wasn't God. He was just along the same lines as Buddha and Krishna and all the others. And so I took all this in. Not all of what they said, but I rationalized it, reasoned it out, and I came up with my own particular philosophy on that. Now, one of the things that happened probably about 2-3 months after I left home, this was probably a little bit before all of this took place, is I got to the point where with existentialism, because there's no hope, because you kind of feel like, what's the point? On New Year's Eve, I decided that I'd just go ahead and commit suicide. And so, 18 years old, I decided to take a whole bottle of pills and end my life, because that was the logical thing to do. There was no emotion about it. I wasn't crying about it. I wasn't, emotionally upset about it. It was just simply, I realized, I can continue to live this life, and it's going to be, painful, not much meaning to it. It's a meaningless life, and after all, there is no God, and so what's the point of going on living a meaningless and hurtful life? And so I just made a logical decision to end my life. And took that whole bottle of pills, and by the grace of God, I'm here today. I didn't die. I kept waiting for it to happen. I ended up with a huge headache, and I've got a ringing in my ears to this day because of that. But it reminds me of how God intervened and kept me from dying when I was 18 years old. But as I moved along in this path, I began to get a little bit more and more out in left field. This particular picture I had from a couple of weeks ago that I showed. Here's another one, kind of begins to show you. I worked as a carpenter, cabinet maker, and on my dad's farm I helped him to build a barn and all. This one is with my brother. You can see me on the right-hand side up there. I wore my hair in braids, long hair. I was redheaded back then. They tell me it's not red anymore, but it was red back then. And this is probably the best picture I have of me. These are the best clothes that I had on. My mother insisted that I put them on for this picture because typically they were rags that I wore. Didn't wear much at all, went barefoot. I was known as Barefoot Bob in different places where I went. And I just wore basically what the hippies wore. And this is where I'd gotten to. And during this time period, as I'm assimilating, because I was an avid reader, I'm assimilating all of this information. And I'm seeking to vet it, okay? I'm seeking to make sure that the things that I'm reading are true. But remember, I don't understand the default setting of every man, woman, and child on this planet. I don't understand that my heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And so I'm vetting everything with a mind and a heart like that is sinful and not recognizing it. And so I'm putting together all of these things that I think are making sense and rationally understanding the human condition. Why we're in the mess that we're in. Why are people so mean to one another? Why is there so much destruction and pain and heartache and things of that nature? If we are on the cutting edge of evolution, which is what I thought, evolution teaches that we go from bad to better, okay? From simple to complex. And so the idea that came to me is that as we evolve as a human race, we ought to be getting better, right? Nicer to one another and less wars and things like that. But as I read history, I saw that it was actually going the other way. The 20th century was the bloodiest century that humanity has ever had. And so we were getting worse, and so it didn't make a lot of sense. And so as I amassed all this information and this knowledge about all these different philosophies and isms, it began to coalesce in my mind and develop to the point where I had to write it down. I began to write a book somewhere around 1976 or so. And I began to write this book, and I spent a lot of time writing this. I took time off from work. I didn't work a lot. I'd work enough to make a bunch of money because I didn't spend anything. After all, if all you do is live out of a pack, what are you going to spend it on, right? So I would save all my money, then quit the job and live off the money that I made until that ran out, and then I'd go get another job. And so during one of these lulls of working, I had some people that let me stay on their place, and I wrote this book in Southern Oregon. Sat down and wrote it. And it was an amazing experience. Now, I know that it's cliche today because I lived it, But during that time period, people talked about the experience of deja vu, right? Feeling like you've done something before or you're meant to be here. I had incredible surges and feelings of deja vu during this time. As I'm writing this book, it is actually a confirmation to me that I'm supposed to be doing this. That the Eastern philosophies and mysticism that I had imbibed taught me that there is a spiritual side out there, and that there are people like Jesus and Buddha who have gone on to higher planes. And so I was basically being told that I was fulfilling my destiny. For the first time in my life, I felt like this was where I was supposed to go. I still didn't believe in God. I still believed, basically, that there, as an atheist, but I sensed that something was guiding me. And so I would spend hour after hour writing in this book. It ended up 500 pages or so. And it was an answer to the human condition. Basically, I came up with this understanding of why we do the things we do. It was a psychological understanding. It was a philosophical understanding. It was based on all this stuff that I had amassed over the years. And when I finally finished the book, something amazing happened. I remember it to this day that I was sitting in that room in Southern Oregon, in my friend's place, and I just finished writing the last chapter to the book, and it was night, and I'm not sure exactly what time it was. But the whole room, as I sat there and I contemplated this finished work and having fulfilled this purpose and fulfilled, in a sense, at least that part of it, my destiny, the whole room just filled with a supernatural light. Now, the light was not on. This was not coming from an incandescent. This was not coming from Edison's fixtures in the room. It was a supernatural light that filled that room. And it confirmed again to me that this was my destiny. I was destined to write this, and I had to share it. Now, for a person that did not like people, that did not trust people, that hated to be around people, that was timid, that was the last thing I wanted to do. But I had this overwhelming sense that I had to share it. But there's something that I had to do specifically to be able to have the power to share it that scared me to death. And so I ran from that. I finished the book, and I went off to my parents' place back in Missouri again, stayed with them. I thought maybe I could, mend the problems, mend the fences with my dad, and didn't work. I was there about 3 months, and we ended up having the same problems all over again. One of the things that happened with this book is it set off a process in my mind that I couldn't shut off. It was like I had this equation, this answer to what was wrong with the human condition, what was wrong with everything, that I seemed impelled to share, and I couldn't shut it off. Every time I'd look at people, I'd look at political situations, this equation, I would apply it to that, and it fit, it worked. It answered the question, answered why they're at war over in the Middle East. Why are they not getting along in Russia? Why, etc., all that sort of thing. Why are individuals in their marriages not getting along? I know this is kind of a crazy story. It's not a normal one, but this is what happened. And why I'm telling it to you is because this is what can happen if we don't recognize the sources that we're listening to and imbibing. And so I had this process going on in my head that I could not shut off. I stayed with my folks in Missouri for a couple of months, like I said, about 3 months, and realized that it wouldn't work. And I finally decided, I've always been true to my feelings, true to myself, that if I believe this, then I need to live it. Because I don't believe that you should believe something and then not live it. I felt that whatever I believed, I need to live it out in my daily life. And so I was running from this. The one thing that it told me that I had to do to go to the next step. And so I finally made the decision to go that route. What I did not realize was that in Proverbs 14, verse 12, it says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death." And that's the door that I was headed for. I decided in Missouri, down by Joplin, that's where my parents live, that I needed to make a complete surrender of myself to this particular philosophy that I'd come up with. In my reading, I understood from Eastern philosophies that, and this is a rough thing, okay, but basically one of the sources I read said every 20 years there is a teacher of righteousness that comes to the race and helps them to grow to the next spiritual plane. So I was thinking perhaps I was being groomed for that position. And so I realized that I did not have the power and the ability. I was so timid that I could not do the very thing that they was asking me to do. I could not be its spokesman. And I did know, though, that in the American Indians, many times what the young braves would do when they wanted to establish their new name and establish themselves is they would go out into the wilderness and they would fast for a certain amount of time. And they would receive visions, typically, from whomever, and they would then know what their purpose was, what their name was, and what they were to do with their lives. So I made a decision. I had been hiking in California and lots of different places here, all over into the Sierra Nevadas, and I decided that I needed to go to a place right about here where the A is, called Last Chance Range. Now, it's a very fitting statement, or a very fitting name for it, because it was my last chance. But it's just above Death Valley. So if you know anything about Death Valley, this is a pretty desolate area. There's not much there. And so what I did is I put my pack on the bus in Missouri, and I sent it to a friend of mine, an old friend down in Southern California, and I took a bus ticket for a place called Big Pine, which was, it's not showing here, but 395, Highway 395 runs up the backside of California there. I took a bus ticket for there, and I got off at night with the shirt on my back, the sandals on my feet, and nothing else. And I began to head out on an adjacent road. I think it's 168 is the highway there that goes out this way. And it's very desolate. It's the only highway out there. And I began to walk. And I walked and I walked, and I was wanting to walk all the way there, but I had stopped eating in Missouri. So it was 3 days without food or water from Missouri. And so I was getting pretty faint. And I came to a point, there was a crook in the road right there, and I could hear a spring off to the side of the road in the desert, in the little hill right next to the road. And so I hiked up to the side there, and sure enough, there was a spring. And so I drank some water, and I got sick from it. So I realized I took that to mean that I shouldn't be drinking any more water. I need to do this the right way. I need to let the power of the spirits, whatever it was, give me the anointing that I needed. You know, by the way, didn't Jesus go out into the desert to be anointed with the power of the Holy Ghost? Mm-hmm. No, he didn't. That's what I thought. But the Bible says that he received the anointing of the Holy Spirit right after he was baptized, and the Spirit led him out into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, and he gained his victory there. But you see what I was doing? I was taking all these different philosophies, all these little things, and I was amalgamating them into my system of belief. And so that's what I thought I was doing. I was going out there, and so I had to do it the right way. No more water, no more eating. I hadn't eaten for 3 days as it was. So finally, I got down to where I couldn't walk anymore, and so I decided I'd hitchhike. Well, if you're out in the middle of nowhere out here, there's not many cars. And lo and behold, there's a truck that came by. And he gave me a ride, and he gave me a ride all the way out to this point where the road takes off. And all during this time, I'm having these incredibly intense feelings of deja vu. I know that I've been here before. I know this is my destiny. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Over and over again, just waves of it like that. And so I got to the point by the road, and then I took off into the desert. I just took a right-hand course and just started walking into the desert. And I just walked and I walked and I walked. And it was an interesting experience because I knew I was getting desperate. And I'd studied psychology, human psychology, so I knew myself well enough to know that when you get into a desperate situation, you basically, self-preservation kicks in. You try to save yourself. I didn't want that to happen. And so what I did when I realized that I might be going around in a circle is that I just took off blindly off into the desert and into some low rocky hills there. And there was a cloud bank that just enveloped me. And I couldn't see for quite a long time. And I walked and I walked and I walked. And finally I couldn't walk anymore. And I just broke. I finally just collapsed because of exertion. And I stayed there for another 3 days. And while I was there, I just thought about what I was doing. I thought about the process of, this is a picture, this is a real picture of the Last Chance Range. It's pretty desolate there. Again, I'm sorry you can't see them very well. We could probably turn off the lights and we could see a little bit better. Here's another picture, Last Chance Range. Very desolate. I mean, there's not much there. It's just, maybe the light's right next to you, Rich, behind that screen there, behind the bookcase. Behind you. Behind you, the bookcase there, yeah. Might help a little bit with it.
Oh, yeah.
There you can see a lot better. So that's what it looks like there. I mean, there's just nothing there. In fact, I'll go back, you can see a little bit better there. In this particular shot, these are ones that I got from, obviously I didn't take them. I got these from the internet. There were no cacti there where I was at. But it's hard scrabble, there's very little vegetation. These are the mountains that are further south of where I was at. I wasn't in any mountains like this. It was more of the lower stuff down here. And I spent the next 3 days there, waiting and waiting and waiting. And while I was there, here's another picture of kind of in the valley area where you might see what's down below. I got to the point where during the night, it would get so cold in the desert that I found a huge boulder and I wrapped myself around that to keep warm. During the day, I stayed in the shade of that boulder because, of course, the heat was going to burn me up during the day. And so I alternated between that and just waited all that time. And you know, friends, as I said, I had disciplined myself, and I believed I knew what I was doing. I wanted this to work. I knew that this was the equation that I had to follow through with, because if I fasted like this, if I waited, if I didn't choke, as it were, that I would receive the power that Jesus received. I would receive the power that the American Indians received. I would receive the enlightenment that the people of the eastern lands would receive when they did similar sorts of things. And so I waited, and I waited, and I finally got to the point where I knew that it wasn't going to work. You know, they say that there's no atheist in a foxhole. And about that 6th day of not eating and then not drinking for about 3 or 4 days, I finally broke. Now, this is a man who had climbed straight up walls. This is a man who had no fear. I disciplined myself though I had no fear of anything. I could do just about anything and accomplish anything in those 10 years that I was on my own. But I got to the point where I broke in that desert. And I remember crying out to whatever was there. I didn't cry out to God because I didn't believe in God. But I knew I was a dead man. I knew because I had learned survival training while I was in the Philippines, and we'd done that in our senior scouting campouts and stuff. I knew about surviving in the desert. And I knew that I was as good as dead. I knew that I had done myself in. And so I cried out. I broke down and I cried. And of course, how do you cry tears when you don't have any liquid in you, right? Because I was emaciated by then. Finally, after some time, I crawled over back to the rock and regained my composure, and I realized that if I was going to make it out of here alive, I'd have to wait till the sun went down and try to crawl out. Now, I hate to be cliches here, but you know the proverbial man in the desert crawling along asking for water kind of a thing? That's pretty much what I was. And as the sun went down and got cooler, I began to crawl and scoot down the hillside where I was in, because there was a valley below, this kind of like this below, and I just decided to go down to the valley because maybe there were people down there. If you look at a topo map of this or the Google Maps of this, this is out in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody out there. And so I crawled, and I could only go for about 20 yards or so, and then I'd collapse, and my heart was just beating inside of me like it was going to beat out of my chest. Because remember, my blood is probably the consistency of syrup, of molasses by now, because I haven't been taking in any water. And so it's beating like it's trying to keep that blood circulating. I crawl, or I'd walk for 20 yards, and finally I got down to the valley floor, and there was a barbed wire fence. And of course, where does a barbed wire fence go to? Well, it can go out to the back 40 or the back 600, or maybe it could go to the house. I chose to go to the right, to the left, and I followed it. And I kept walking, falling, walking, falling, walking, falling. And my hair, as you can see it there in that picture, I pulled out my braids and my hair was just frizzed out. I mean, I looked like a freak. I was a sight to behold. And full beard, And finally, I get to the point, it's night, of course, and finally I see some lights in the distance. And it's a ranch house. And so I walked, I walked, and finally I got up to the front door. And I knocked on the door, and of course, looking like I'm looking, this woman opens the door and immediately slams it in my face. And I didn't think about it, of course, and I'm not in any condition to think about I'm scaring somebody. And so in the next second or so, her husband comes back to the door with, I think, every gun he owns in his possession. He's not sure what's come out of the desert. And I was able to convince them that it was pretty harmless. I just needed a drink of water. I needed to be able to sleep because I couldn't sleep with the heat and the cold night after night, day after day. And so they let me in finally, and she began to talk to me, and unbeknownst to me, he in the other room was calling the local county sheriff. And so they talked to me, and they gave me some nectarines. That's the first food I had, and to this day, nectarines are my favorite food. They went right through me, though, but they still are my favorite food. So anyway, probably after about an hour, because they were quite a ways out there, the sheriff comes, and he gives me a ride in the back of his cruiser to the psych ward in Bishop, California. Bishop is the most closest city there, and small hospital there. And so they took me to the psych ward there, and they evaluated me to see if I was going to do it again. And I was able to convince them that I wasn't going to do it again, because what had happened is I finally revived a little bit. I realized that my equation hadn't worked. That what I had planned out, step by step, and the Spirit had been teaching me, as it were, had almost killed me, and it hadn't worked. I wasn't any better. I hadn't achieved my purpose. And so I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to do. And so anyway, they fed me some good nutritious food. I think it was a ice cream sandwich or two. The second food I had. And I said I had somebody that I wanted to go down to see in Southern California that I was going to talk with them. They were a born-again Christian. And so I was able to convince them. A doctor there gave me $20 for the bus ticket. So I took the bus, went down there, and got cleaned up, cut my hair, and she began to witness to me. And I still wasn't really listening to Christianity. I just was floored that all my life, for those 10 years, actually more like 15 years since I'd had this incident happen in the Philippines, I had trusted myself, and I had always come through. I couldn't trust people, but I'd always been able to trust myself. And I'd always given myself the right answers. But here, all of a sudden, I was face to face with the fact that I could not even trust myself, because I'd almost killed myself, and it had not worked. Now, friends, I don't know how to explain this to you except to say that sometimes we can get so convinced that we're right that we'll go hell and high water to perform whatever it is we think is right, and we'll do it because we're convinced it is right. And that's where I was at. And yet it had not worked. And now I'm confronted with the ultimate catastrophe in my life, is that not only can I not trust people, I can't even trust myself. And I didn't know what to do. And so finally, in desperation, I was probably down there for about 6 months or so. I decided, there was a lady that I'd met before that was living up in Spokane, Idaho. And I thought, she wanted to marry me, so maybe if I do something impulsive and dumb, I'll just get out of this rut, okay? And so I called her up, and I'm intending to go up there and marry her, and just do something impulsive. I'd never done anything impulsive in my life. So she sends me $55 for a bus ticket, and I buy the bus ticket, and it's about winter by now, November, and not thinking about it, but I buy the bus ticket, and gets me all the way to Klamath Falls, run out of money, and I begin to hitchhike. Well, it's winter, it's a bad time to hitchhike. I get off in a snowstorm in Klamath Falls, and I sit down in a diner to eat. Hadn't eaten for a couple of days. I was into that kind of fasting in those days. And somebody comes up to me and says, "Would you like a ride?" in the diner. And I've never had that in all my years of hitchhiking. Nobody's ever come up to me and asked to give me a ride. I had to, thumb it or whatever. And I said, sure. So I finished my meal. We got in his truck, and he had almost driven off the road in the ice the night before, so he was scared to go on his own. So we drove all the way up to to Yakima in Washington State. And during that time, in the bus and in his cab, they were talking to me about the Lord. And I found something strange beginning to happen to me. In Southern California, I was still an atheist, but as I'm traveling up California into Oregon and then finally to Washington State, by the time I get off out of his truck in Washington State, I'm out there on the interstate with my thumb out praising the Lord that he had gotten me this far this fast. I couldn't believe it.
I can't either, not in Washington State.
And to this day, I don't understand. I don't believe in evolution, but I saw myself, as I look back, I saw myself evolving from an atheist to somebody that's praising God and looking for a ride. Now, it was night by that time, and I knew from past experience nobody's going to pick up a hippie in the dark. And so I walk back into town. I have $7 left to my name, and I buy a bus ticket that gets me to a place called George, Washington. It's a little truck stop in the middle of Washington State. And I get there, and I get into the diner there where I'm waiting. It's all-night diner, and I fall asleep, and I talk to the proprietor there. He, I don't know, we just hit it off, I guess, and then I fall asleep in the booth. About 2 o'clock in the morning, the Greyhound bus comes in, and the driver comes in and sits down to eat, and I hear them talking, but I wake up, don't know what they're talking about, and finally the bus driver says, "Do you know anybody in Spokane?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got somebody that I'm going to see." And so a few minutes go by, and he says, "Put your pack out by the bus." And all of a sudden I realized what's going on. I said, "Hey, I'm not looking for a freebie. I don't have any money." And he says, "It's okay. It's been taken care of for you." And so I feel like I've been given $1 million because it's winter now. I tried to sleep outside, it's 20 below, and it wouldn't work. And so even with the bag that I had, and so I thank him profusely, put my bag on there, and there's one seat left on that bus. Only one. I get into Spokane, realize I can't marry this girl, but I'm feeling this spiritual drawing. I'm feeling this spiritual drawing, and I know my brother and sister are born-again Christians up in Sandpoint, Idaho. And so I talked this lady into taking me up to Sandpoint, and I get there to my brother's place, and I think it was about Sunday that day. And they take me to church the next day, and I walk into that church, and I feel like I've come home. I just feel like this overwhelming sense that this is where I belong. And I give my heart to the Lord Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. And I'm just so excited because I'm turned inside out. You see, friends, I went from that atheist in Southern California to by the time I got to Sandpoint, Idaho, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ. I don't know who He is, but I believe in Him because I didn't know the Bible. I didn't know one end of it from the other. But something has happened in me. I am transformed. The things that I like to do, I no longer like to do. There was stuff that I had addictions to before I became a Christian that I could never, no matter how disciplined I was, I could never overcome them. When I gave my heart to the Lord, they were gone. Just like that. Gave me victory over the drugs, over whatever else it was that I had. Gave me the victory over it. And I know there's a God in heaven who cares for us. You see, friends, what I realize is that as I look back on that experience of mine, I realized that God was looking down on planet Earth. And He saw my dilemma. He saw that I was looking for truth. But He saw that I was on the wrong road. He saw how sincere I was, but I was sincerely wrong. And He had mercy upon me. He gave compassion, and He reached down and He plucked me as a brand out of the fire. And I learned a very powerful lesson through that experience. That not only can you not trust certain sources, you can't even trust yourself. About that time, I was so excited about my experience, I decided to go share it with some people that I had known as my hippie days. And so I was a few miles over in Montana. I went to see them, and they began to teach me how to study the Bible, subject by subject. And as I began to read that Bible and to study it, I realized how dangerous a road that I had been on. That somebody was grooming me for a life that was totally opposite of what God wanted. That the devil had plans for me to lead a lot of people astray. But God, in His mercy, reached out and touched my life and transformed me. And I remember that week studying my Bible and learning that Jesus was my God. Not just somebody that I could become like and be another Buddha or another Jesus, but that He was my God and Savior. And in the middle of that week, the Lord spoke to my heart and He says, you've tried trusting everybody else's word. You've trusted the existentials. You've trusted the Buddhist. You've trusted the Eastern religious, people. Why not try trusting me? Why not try my word for change? And basically He said, your word, trusting your word, almost got you killed. And I couldn't deny that. I knew that I was a dead man out there, but He intervened. And so I said, okay, Lord, I'll give it a try. I'll try your word. And friends, let me tell you, He has never let me down once. As I have lived my life by the word of God, I have found that He is as good as His word. That everything in this book is true. People will tell you it's full of lies. It's full of fables. It's not written by the people that wrote it. I have taken my scientific training and I have applied it to this. And everybody can do this. Studying by subject, you're able to see, is it consistent from the beginning all the way to the end? And I did this, and I continue to do this. And I find that this word is true. That it is true from the beginning all the way to the end. You know, one of the things that helped me so much is that I look back on my life and I realized that not only did Jesus save me in the desert, but I also got to thinking, you know, why did you save me? I've done a lot of horrible things in my life. There's no reason why he should have plucked me as a brand out of the fire. There's lots of other people that are a lot better or more worthy to be saved than me. And yet the Bible says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And as I gave my heart to the Lord, he forgave me for those sins of the past. Remember the one I told you about that I was convicted of as an atheist when I was staying with my folks? That night where I spent several hours brought that back to me. It was the Holy Spirit that spoke to my heart. And you know, one thing that I remember so well, and I realized sometimes we feel like God's not there. I don't have a picture of the rock that I laid up against that night. I've never been back to that place. Don't plan to. But I think about that rock like this rock. I wrapped myself around it at night, and it kept me warm, somewhat warm. During the day, it shielded me from the fierce sun. And the Lord basically told me, you know, I was that rock with you in the desert. I never left you, even though you weren't, following me. I was that rock that you never have to worry will ever leave you. Friends, I tell this story tonight because God never gives up on us. And I tell you this story because I realized for the first time in my life that I was a pawn in somebody's hand. Because I did not believe in the devil or a God, I was a free agent for anybody to use me in any way that he wanted to. And as I studied the Bible and I realized the great controversy, the fact that there is an adversary of God, I realized that he was manipulating me. He was leading me in my pathway. I was sincere. You could not find anybody more sincere than me. But my sincerity did not protect me from being manipulated by the devil. And that's so much why I share this story with people in my seminars. Because I want you to go away from here understanding that on this planet, you cannot trust your own heart. The Bible indicates that we will have a problem with our carnal nature, our sinful nature, until we are transformed and taken to heaven. So therefore, even though we're born again, we may find ourselves in a place where our heart will still lead us astray, just like King Saul. He had the Spirit poured out upon him. The Bible says he was turned into another man. And there are many good men of the Bible that ended up making bad decisions. You cannot trust yourself. You must trust the only thing that can stand the test of time, and that's the Word of God. And it will never let you down. It will lead you all the way to heaven. So my prayer and my burden tonight is, as we continue to go through these lectures, prophecy after prophecy, as the Lord unfolds the truth in His Word, Open your hearts to what the Word of God says. Test it and see that you can live your life by a thus saith the Lord. Let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, tonight we've walked a pretty amazing journey. It's not a normal testimony. In fact, a lot of people, when you hear about their testimonies of coming to the Lord, you hear about them overcoming drugs and alcohol and being in jail and killers and rapists and things like this. But here, this is different. But yet I firmly believe that you gave me this testimony for this very purpose. In these last days, there are so many voices out there saying, follow me, trust me, I know the way, I have the truth. And I experienced firsthand that you can't trust those sources. No matter how diligent they seem to be, no matter how honest, how sincere. And I also learned you can't even trust yourself. But there is one thing I've learned that I can trust, and that's the Word of the living God. Lord, may each person here make a decision to make that their firm foundation and trust only in God's Word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, as we close this session tonight, we're going to move on Friday back into Revelation, as I said as we started out tonight, that we'll go back to Revelation 10. We'll continue the timeline that we saw there with the Islamic conquest and the punishing of the Christian north by the Islamic hordes. And we'll see a continuation in chapter 10, but of some further events that are going to fill out our timelines a little bit more. Then Saturday night, we're going to look at into the most holy of heaven. We're going to see that as Jesus has been walking through Revelation, he's only been in the holy place so far. Remember that? Now we're going to see him go into the most holy place. And there's a powerful significance to that move. And we're going to see that Saturday night. So don't miss it as we prepare for the weekend. God bless you and drive safely home.